So in this last session of 2023, it is a great pleasure to receive Professor Kirstin Drenkhahn. She is a professor at the Law School of the Free University of Berlin, and she has been working quite a lot in the last years in a very, very interesting project with some colleagues on the comparison between penal policies and practices in different contexts, particularly in France and Germany. And she has published this year a very interesting book with Fabien Chauvard and Tobias Singelstein, Impending Challenges to Penal Moderation in France and Germany, Strained Restraint. So today she will present for us based on a chapter of this book. So Kirstin, it's fantastic to have you here. As we always do, we will have 30 minutes of presentation and then also half an hour for Q&A. So Kirstin, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maximo. Thank you all for joining us today. I see a lot of research friends. Hello, welcome. And a lot of people who are cited in this book too. I'm going to share a few slides with you. The first slide is obviously a slide like a promotion for the book. So I think it makes sense to read the book, maybe not buy the hardcover version because it's astonishingly expensive. But if you find it somewhere else, you can just read it. I usually don't really like to read my own stuff after I've published it because I'm easily bored with that, but I like to read the book. So maybe that's a good trigger for you to actually do it as well. So I try to kind of summarize our findings that we summarize and kind of synthesize in the last chapter of this book. And I found this quite hard, I must say, because of the vast amount of data that we collected. So let me introduce you a little bit to the project that we did and why we actually did this project. This project, Penal Cultures on the Continent, maybe that's a bit hyperbolous, but it was really about Germany and France, was sparked by an unease among us, the PIs, Tobias Singelstein, Fabien Chauvard, and I, about the national and international research on punishment and society, and especially about how our two countries were pictured in this research. To be honest, Fabien had this idea and he came to Tobias and me actually with kind of a ready action plan. And we were a bit hesitant at the beginning because we didn't really know what we were actually agreeing to. And I'm quite happy that I didn't really know what I was agreeing to, because probably otherwise I wouldn't have gone forward with it. So what we see when we look at punishment and society research internationally, then we usually have a lot of macro level studies. And if it's international comparison, we have macro indicators that are compared on a state level. But there's very little comparative research on, well, let's say medium level factors. And usually the actors of criminal justice, the population, or other entities that might contribute to the way that punishment is considered as in a society, and the role of punishment in a society is not studied on a comparative level, and usually also not in one study for one country. So you have all these studies that look at one sphere, one of the public spheres maybe, and draws conclusions from that, but it's usually not coupled with other spheres. And when we look at this research, Germany and France are usually seen as quite the boring countries. Nothing really happens here from the international perspective. In domestic literature, otherwise, so on the contrary, there's a lot of critical opinions about penal policy developments, about the media reporting on crime and punishment, and also about public opinion. If you look at the ideas about public opinion, often the people are considered to be very, very strict, almost like bloodthirsty. And it is also something that might come across in the media. So the role of the media is quite difficult to conceive, but there's also in most of these countries in Europe, there's no media studies on crime and punishment. It's criminologists who do that, and we really don't know about media systems, and we don't know about the methods of media studies people. Then we have a few interesting points that come up in the literature too about France and Germany. They both are EU members and Council of Europe members, and that is important for criminal law because the EU is now a player in the field of criminal law, and the Council of Europe has a strong human rights regime with their own Court of Human Rights. And so this might also have some sort of an impact that has also come up in the literature. Then we have these political models. On the one hand, this model of welfare states, or the models of welfare states by Gösta Esping-Andersen, where France and Germany are in the same group as conservative corporatist welfare states. And then if we look at Arend Leipert's pattern in democracy, France and Germany are quite different. France is a centralized, in many ways, a centralized state with very few veto players, which would presume that France has a more serious, more stricter criminal policy, where Germany, as a federation, is the model of one of the patterns, like the consensus democracy, with a lot of veto players who have a say also in criminal justice policy. So what do we really make out of this? So first of all, we grouped together a larger group of French and German researchers. We were generously funded by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft and the Agence Nationale de la Recherche, the two national science foundations. And so we had a multidisciplinary team. In Germany, most of us were lawyers, or are still lawyers, one sociologist. And from France, we have a couple of political scientists, Nicolas Hubé, who is a media and communication studies expert, and Fabien Jobard as the French PI, who is a sociologist and political scientist, and he usually studies police in a criminological perspective. And we had a lot of research students and also research friends who joined the team for some time and then dropped off. And even in this beginning, when we had already written up our application and got the money, we didn't really know what to expect from this from our project. Because, well, we also had all these conceptions out of our own domestic literature, but also out of the international literature about our countries, and we're quite conflicted. So what to expect, what the outcome would be. So what did we do? So this project needed a lot of people because we had a lot of work to do. We based the whole thing on this work package about penal systems, where we did a little bit of comparative legal analysis, looked at official criminal justice data, and tried to figure out, well, what is really the input level of the criminal justice system. And then we looked at three political spheres, one could say, or three societal spheres: the population, the political system, and the media. And all of these work packages, we had quantitative approaches and qualitative approaches. So we did a larger project on punitivity or punitiveness in comparison, where we did a population survey in France and Germany and a survey among judges and prosecutors with the same questionnaire. So we have a bit of comparative data between laypersons and professionals. And then we also did interviews with normal people on the same vignettes that we used here in this survey, and a few more vignettes of how they would decide in criminal justice cases and criminal matters. But in these interviews, the focus was on the reasoning. Why would they decide this way and not the other way? And it was a little bit the same approach in the other two work packages, although concerning the political system and the media, we also had longitudinal approaches. So the longitudinal approach in the political systems work package is something that Johanna Nichols is still doing and has done. Johanna is in the crowd, so I'm kind of calling out here. So she is doing a longitudinal quantitative comparison of the development of criminal legislation in Germany and France from 1995 to 2019, which is extremely, it's an extreme amount of work. And we thought that we would do a comparison both of the criminal codes and the codes of criminal procedure, but doing the criminal codes was already enough to kind of almost break a person. And then we had interviews with politicians, and we also did an analysis of political trajectories of politicians in the highest offices in Germany and France. So the question was whether or not law and order sparks your career. It doesn't, so to make it short. And a bit the same in the media package. So we had interviews here with journalists out of print and broadcast media, and a longitudinal analysis of front page headlines of quality and popular print media, so newspapers, and the part of this development or the analysis starts in 1971. That's why we did print media, because we wanted a really long run. And the thing that really made it difficult was this here, the synthesis. So if you've got all the data, you have a lot of findings, and these findings are not really homogeneous. What do you do? And that was the case with this. So the synthesis was really the hardest part, and I think that's also why we took so long after the project officially finished to write the book, because we really needed to make a lot of sense out of the findings. And before I try to show to you why it was so difficult, I'll map out our main argument. So the main argument, as it's in the title of the book, is that there is what we find in international literature about Germany and France, and the role of punishment in these two societies, that there is actually penal moderation in these two countries. But at the same time, the findings from domestic literature that are much more critical and highlight the outbreaks, one could say, that's also true. And it kind of is the fabric of this penal moderation. So this restraint we see as a general tendency is not something that is really stable. It's not like along a very slow river. It's something that has to be renegotiated and stabilized all the time because of these instances where the public, the media, and the politics want to break up this or feel the need to kind of break up this idea that rationality and less is more maybe also needs to be overcome in certain cases. So this whole system, that's why we did all these crazy arrows here, is actually really interrelated. So we'll see in the coming up slides, or maybe in some of the slides, maybe the time is too short, that there is actually some sort of interrelation between these spheres. We'll see that politicians and journalists think that there is a strong public demand for more criminal law, for harsher sentences, for more protection through criminal law. And at the same time, politicians and the media and journalists think that it's their task to keep this public demand and their idea about a rational criminal policy in check. So how they negotiate what they presume from the public is part of this shifting and unstable penal moderation or restraint. And we'll also see that the population, and that was a bit surprising for us, is not really demanding more penalty when it comes to specific cases. We used in these two country surveys, we also used general questions about the penal system and like satisfaction with the penal system. And there you could kind of, it's often clear that people will not be satisfied with their penal system, with the courts. They think the courts are too lenient. But when we look at the outcome for our vignettes, where we have these small criminal cases, and people were asked to tell us what they think would be a just sanction or a just appropriate reaction to this behavior, it's also clear that this is not way out of proportion with what our criminal justice professionals would think about the same case. And when we look at the interviews, the same is true. People put a lot of work into coming up with an appropriate sentence for a certain crime. So, let's have a little bit of a look at the findings. So the official picture, the law, usually everybody says that's not really interesting, but we thought it makes a lot of sense because we have these two countries in the middle of Europe. They're both continental civil law traditions. Germany actually copied a lot of ideas from the French criminal code, and especially the French criminal code or the French code of criminal procedure. And what I have here for you are schematic views of the sanction systems. What you see here for France and also here for Germany is that both have penalties and preventive measures. That's the common feature. But the French system has a lot more standalone possibilities for sanctions. So a lot of the things that are hidden here in the German system, because they can only be linked to, for example, probation, like imprisonment for probation as an obligation, or as an obligation for early release decisions that can be used as standalone sanctions in the French system. So this looks a lot more diverse than this, even though hidden, this is also more diverse than it looks. Interestingly, although both of these systems have the offender's guilt as something, as a point of reference, the French system has this idea that it's all about the individualization of sanctions to prevent recidivism as the key principle. So all of these mostly community sanctions have this idea that for minor to medium crime, you have an individualization and you have a very good answer for everybody who is that is individualized to the needs of this person. Whereas in Germany, in the system, although you have a lot of different principles that should be used when determining the sanction, at the end of the day, it's a retributive system with two key principal penalties: imprisonment and the fine. So one would expect from these two sanction systems that probably the German system is more serious, more strict. But if you look at criminal justice statistics, I only brought these filter models. You see there are quite different developments. Most important, I think, are prison and probation sentences and actual prison sentences. This down here and here. And from what I just said, one would probably think that this is the German filter process in 2019, and this is France, but it's absolutely the other way around. Germany with 83 million inhabitants is the upper one, and France with 65 million is down here. So we have a lot more prison and probation sentences in France than in Germany. It's more than double the number of what comes out of the German system. Most of the sentences that go for that are dished out in convictions in Germany are actually fines. And as we use the day fine, it's quite easy to determine if you have a prison sentence as kind of the default thing to go to. Whereas in France, there are several mechanisms in criminal procedure that make it quite difficult to actually individualize sentences. You have, for example, the comparution immédiate. That's a very short, it's a form of a speedy trial with a hearing that has where the judge can actually give a sentence up to 10 years. The kind of the same structure in Germany, that the judge can only have a sentence up to 1 year of imprisonment. And in these very short and speedy trials, there is no real time to actually gather the information you need for the individualization. So it's easier to dish out a prison sentence here. Also because even though there are fines in the French system, they are lump sums and not day fines. So that's also maybe a caveat if you think about the individualization. So if we look at the population, again, we have on these very, I already said that, on these very broad questions, we have very divergent answers from the French and the Germans. So just as an example, the notorious death penalty question, Germans are a lot more decided against the death penalty than the French. So no, that would be the gray people would be the Germans, like the boring people, and the more colorful people are here the French. That's probably that's very much in line with the research on the death penalty, but it is quite an interesting finding that we have these big differences between these two populations. When we look at the vignettes, not so much. So I've brought this multiple correspondence analysis picture here with me. Fabien has done several of these, and this is the distribution of the two country samples out of our survey among over all vignettes, the likelihood where of people to decide between the range of sanctions that we gave them, and as you can see, most importantly are these two ellipses. They almost overlap, so there's no real statistical difference between our two country samples. When we look at different vignettes, we also see that for some of the cases, so we had first offender cases, repeat offenses, and several variations. We see that for repeat offenses and offenses of street violence, drug dealing, repeat shoplifter, drunk driving, repeat again, insulting a police officer, again, a repeat offense, and assault with injuries, and robbery, street robbery. We have a lot of people, 85 to 90% of the responses, who are grouped in this this area here. And you see that for some of these cases, again, most of them are actually in the realm of fines and probation and prison. But again, we also see that there's a great variety of responses. There is no unanimous point of reference, so people are quite, well, quite diverse in their answers. If we look at first offenders, that's quite different. These are, well, we didn't include the violent offenses here, obviously, but for first offenders, a lot of people opt for a fine. This shoplifting by a working man, that is one of our shoplifting cases. We also have a shoplifting case of a man who doesn't have work, who has to live on social welfare, and who has children. And for that person, there are a lot of discharge decisions and community work. So there is a lot of reasonable decision making here, even in these vignettes. If we look at the interviews, then we see that most of the interviewees argue inductively. That means that they use penal arguments and penal principles, but not in the way that they first declare their penal principles, their persuasion, and then they say this means for this case that they need to have a prison sentence because that is so bad. But they actually argue on a case-by-case basis and very much individualize the sentence. And even though retributivism is invoked most often, we have a lot of utilitarianism in these arguments as well, and also rehabilitation for minor crimes, for first offenders. That comes up quite often as well. Well, exclusionary sentences and arguments we have for the most serious cases. In these interviews, we also had serious crime, like a terrorism offense, several cases with sexual violence, and we already see some sort of a bifurcation here. So, but interestingly, even in these cases where a lot of people opt for a prison sentence, they usually also say something about rehabilitation. They consider prison to be a place for treatment, many of them, which is interesting because that's what prisons probably should be like, but we all know that it's quite difficult to actually get this going. Then if we look at politics, I already said that law and order issues are not really a winning ticket in Germany and France. For some people, they tried it, but in France, Nicolas Sarkozy famously failed with this in a way. The politicians told us that crime and justice topics are not really a priority on the national level. They try to rationalize criminal justice, keep up the rehabilitative ideal, but I also said it before that they are tempted to be tough on crime and kind of address current cases. So in current and outrageous cases, you find these very over-the-top stances. And they assume that there's a punitive demand by the public, and they get that out of the media and from interactions with their constituents, which probably are a bit biased, because why would you tell your MP that you're totally satisfied with what they do in criminal justice? You usually go there to complain. So there's probably some sort of a bias. They also think that there's an increase in symbolic laws in criminal justice that kind of on the surface meet the public demand, but also don't really have an impact on how the criminal justice system functions. I'd like to add that sometimes these symbolic laws have a massive impact on the criminal justice system because they provide a lot of work for example, the prosecution services. Well, and if you look at these, the way that legislation developed in both countries, we don't really see a turn. Even though the number of legal changes in Germany in 1998 is quite high, but that was a major reform of the criminal code. So that's not surprisingly. We see a steady stream of new laws, more than 100 laws over these 25 years in each country, with a lot more changes. These are only like the official laws, but the changes in the law are a lot more. Most of these changes are repressive, but it's not in a way that increases penalties for a specific offense. So the penalties do not excessively rise, but it's an expansion of elements of existing offenses, or these are changes in general provisions in the criminal codes, mainly about sanctions. So it's not a punitive turn, but it's really a steady increase and a net widening. And that is something that's quite contrary to what politicians told us, that they are like being faithful to the rehabilitative ideal and that they see prison as a last resort. But then again, I mean, even here, even if you don't increase penalties, there will be more opportunities for sending people to prison, although that doesn't happen in reality. So getting to the last point, the media. This analysis of headlines, I've put a table into the slide. We see that in about 50 years since 1971, in the quality press in both France and Germany, there is a very, very low amount and low level of crime news on the front pages. But since 2007, there is quite an increase. And for 2007, 12, and 17, our team also coded front page headlines of popular press and included the only real tabloid in the two countries' Bild. And what we see here is, so the problem is that the two media systems in Germany and France are quite different, and the way that people report and think about how to frame topics is also different. The topics that in crime and criminal justice differ between the countries. Most of the headlines, 30 to 40%, about national security issues for both countries. But then when it comes to specific crimes, there's way more about, for example, property crime and sexual offenses in France than in Germany. These crimes almost never make it to the headlines of newspapers in Germany, whereas in France that's relatively often, but that usually has to do with criminal justice discussions. So that is not like on a case basis, but it's linked to actual public debates. For example, the Me Too debate in France, but also the debate about, for example, domestic violence and so on. And then we have as a main driver, probably not some sort of criminal justice policy in the newsroom, but the economic motivation, the tabloidization and the economic pressures, because here again, journalists think that the public wants to read this, that this is some sort of a demand, and at the same time, while meeting this alleged public demand, journalists also think that they kind of need to educate the public to avoid a panic or to avoid really like outrages. But again, as we've seen before, the public is not really demanding this that much. So this is the amount. This is a little bit about of the data that we needed to make sense of. Yeah, I'm open to questions. I think that there probably are a lot. I'd stop sharing, if that's okay, and then we can talk about this.